Hi, I'm Niels from Line Equipment, and I'm here today to tell you about the Ortlieb quick lock systems they use on some of their panniers. Quick lock, or QL as it's often referred to, is a system which Ortlieb have put on their pannier so that you can basically remove the pannier or the bit of luggage using a one-handed operation, making it nice and user-friendly. There's QL1, which has been in the range for years and years and years, probably one of the most well-travelled pannier attachment systems in the world. There is a refined iteration called QL3.1, which is the one that you find on most panniers in the range these days. There's QL3.1, which is used on kind of like urban products. And then finally, new for 21, there is QLS, which is found on the new fork pack. So as I mentioned before, QL1 has been in the range for ages. It's basically the first version that Ortlieb designed to move away from using kind of metal hooks or like webbing straps to attach a pannier or luggage to your bike. And he wanted a system where basically to remove it, you didn't have to undo hooks, you didn't have to undo straps, you could just lift the handle and the pannier would come away. So what he's come up with is a design where you've got two hooks at the top which attach to the top rail of your pannier rack, and the hooks are spring loaded. So when you grab the carry handle, the hooks open up, and then when you let go of the handle, the hooks snap shut and are attached to the pannier rack. Those hooks sit on a small little rail and can be adjusted using a 3mm Allen key as well. So you slide them along the rail and put them in the right place depending on kind of what rack you're using. Without any inserts, these hooks have got an aperture of 16mm. Now obviously that's way too big for a lot of pannier racks that are out on the market. So QL1 systems do come with two sets of inserts which reduce the aperture to either 8mm or 11mm, depending on kind of what you need. Around the bottom half of the pannier you've got this lower anchoring rail. Again, you adjust it using a 3mm Allen key. If you undo it, you can basically swivel the hook around into whatever direction you want. Now, generally speaking, we recommend that the hook points forward in the direction of the direction of movement, because your stopping forces will always be far greater than your accelerating forces. So you want the panniers to stop sliding forward if you have to slow down suddenly. The rail can also be inverted, so if you find that hook is a little bit too low, you can flip that rail around so it basically points up, and then you've got a little bit more space above there. Puts the lower anchoring rail in a slightly more elevated position. Behind that lower anchoring hook as well, there's a subtle little spacer which a lot of people don't realise, and basically what that does is it allows you to adjust the spacing between the hook and the pannier body itself. So by undoing the screw, moving that spacer 90 degrees, you're effectively spacing that hook another mil and a half away from that pannier body, and it just gives you a little bit more clearance if you're using on a rack with particularly chunky stays. As I mentioned, QL1's been used and abused for years and years and years. It is absolutely solid, but it has been refined over the years and kind of moved on to QL2.1 now. Having said that, there's nothing wrong with this system. It's still available in the range and generally tends to be found on the more kind of like entry-level panniers like the back roller or the sport roller city. So moving on to QL2.1 then. So QL2.1 is what you find on the back roller classic, which is effectively our best-selling pannier by far. QL2.1 is based on the same idea as QL1. The biggest difference is that it's completely tool-free. So rather than having to use that 3mm Allen key to adjust the hooks, you can basically just lift these latches and move the hook along the rail and then fit it into any of those little holes there to put it into the right place. Now if you find that you need a slightly bigger hook, you can switch these 16mm hooks out for 20mm hooks for particularly chunky racks. You might find those on e-bikes, sometimes mopeds and bits and bobs like that as well. So you can switch the hook out by just moving it into the centre of the rail, and the whole thing just comes away. So it's really easy to kind of replace if you needed to. Lower anchoring rail, same thing as the QL1 system. You basically can invert that rail so the lower anchoring hook can sit up a bit higher if you need to, but the adjustment is tool free, so you basically unscrew that knob there, and then the hook spins around in any direction you want, and you can fit it along the rail. So to tighten it, just tighten that up, and that's kept securely in place. Same as QL1 again, you've got that kind of little spacer there, so if you need that little bit of extra clearance from that lower anchoring hook and you don't want to sort of bend it out of place, just moving that spacer 90 degrees gives you a little bit more clearance between the hook itself and the pannier body. Now, other little features that kind of distinguish this between QL1 and QL2.1 is that the rail itself, this kind of top rail, is a lot stiffer. So what they were finding with people who'd been on like really long journeys and like really stuffing a lot of product into their panniers, is that the QL1 rail, which has got these kind of longer slots, it's just a little bit more flexible. So what you sometimes found is that you stuff the pannier and made it absolutely full, the rail would bend a little bit, and it just makes it that little bit harder to put back onto a sort of straight rack. Other little features that you've got are the second plastic compound. So on the kind of touch points between the attachment system and the rack, Ortlieb on the QL2.1 system use a slightly softer plastic compound. So you can see it here on the lower anchoring rail, there is that kind of like slightly lighter grey material, and that stops that abrasion from happening when you're using a rack on like a rack in fairly gritty conditions. It stops the rack from getting abraded too much. And the same applies to the little QL inserts which you go in there. Now, speaking of which, on a QL2.1 attachment system, you get 3 sets of inserts. You get 8mm, 10mm and 12mm, and without any inserts in there, it's a 16mm aperture. So it allows you to kind of fine tune the fit of the bag a lot more to the rack that you're using. Moving on then to QL3.1. This is what you tend to find on kind of products that are made for use around town. And the idea with this is, again, still it's a quick release system, so you can remove the pannier single-handedly. And with QL3.1 you can actually fit it single-handedly quite easily as well. But the pannier hooks, the actual kind of bracket, stays on the bike. So you can just see it here, where the bracket, which comes with the pannier, is mounted to the rack, and the whole kind of mounting mechanism actually stays on the bike, so that when you remove the pannier, A, it doesn't catch the side of your legs when you're walking around town with it, and also B, it doesn't look quite as much like a pannier. It can look more like a kind of like a briefcase, particularly for things like the downtown or commuter bag. You know, it can just look like a nice urban bag rather than like something you've just taken off a bike, like a bike pannier might do. Now in terms of fitting these on the QL3.1, you basically, what we tend to do is you align the bottom slot with that bottom tab there on the attachment bracket, and then the bag just swivels into place. So that's that solid. If you want to remove it, you've got a little wire here. You pull on the wire, that releases the locking mechanism, and then again you pivot it out of the way, and the whole bag just comes off. For QL2.1 and QL1, like I said earlier, we always tend to recommend that the hook points forwards, and then in terms of the pannier hooks, you basically just find the most suitable position, ideally as kind of wide apart as you can, as the rack can accommodate, and that will give you the most secure fit on your pannier rack. Last but not least, new for 2021 is the QLS attachment system, and this is used on Ortlieb's new fork packs. So with the fork pack you get a small little bracket, which is super lightweight, and that can either be mounted to like a traditional 3-pack mount that you might find on like fork legs, or you can use effectively like a Jubilee clip, which can be mounted to things like suspension forks, and that can be used to mount the same bracket to those Jubilee clips. So with these, same thing, you basically just align the 2 bottom tabs and the top 2 notches at the same time, and it just clips into place. To release it, there's a little tab, you put it sideways, and then lift the bag up, and it comes away.